Hi, I'm Mike Sibley, and I lead James Moore's manufacturing team. On this episode of More on Manufacturing, we're joined by Marie Hibbert. Marie joined James Moore just a few months ago and is our Director of Business Intelligence and Data Analytics. Prior to James Moore, Marie was actually with Florida Power and Light as a director in their tax technology group, focusing on implementing tools and technologies to support the organization in the areas of process automation and analytics. That's a lot of that's a lot of words there, but so Marie, we got a pretty fancy title with business intelligence and data analytics. Why don't you just tell us what is that?
So really, it just boils down to I help organizations use the data that they already have access to be more strategic and make better business decisions. So I think we see over and over again that companies are sitting in just upon a vast amount of information and don't really either have like the time or the capital or the resources to really leverage that in a way that can be meaningful.
Yeah, and actually, that was one of the thought processes to having you join the show this month is that I work working with manufacturers of all sizes. Mm-hmm. They've got data, and some of them know how to use it. Some of them do use it. Some of them use some of it, and some of it's just kind of all over the place. And so, I really think this is something that, regardless of size, manufacturers need to think about it. But given your expertise, from your perspective, why is this important? Why is business intelligence? Because that's actually kind of a really weird term. So I think people get like data a lot, but business intelligence. So why is that important?
So, I think if we've learned anything over the last year and a half, it's that change happens, right? And as an organization, if we're agile and we're flexible, in one scenario, at least we can keep pace with the change, or like what would be even better is to be able to capitalize on the change. Mm-hmm. And so I think, you look at organizations and they have this data and they don't really realize that it's one of their most important assets. And I think until you throw out the fancy terms, data analytics and business intelligence, it's really just using data to make decisions. That's all it boils down to. And that can incorporate systems and technologies and data and all of those things, but it's how do I use my data to make decisions in my organization?
So I guess, we're talking about manufacturers and, I just mentioned they've got tons of data. They've got, and, so this is about, to me, I always look at it and say, okay, we want to take operations and kind of connect it to finance. But I think more than that, we want to take this data. So we got financial data all the time, and we can get that out of the accounting system, and we can put in Excel spreadsheets, and we're great with that. But there's all this other type of data out there, and I think it's more than about just connecting to finance. It's also about strategy, about making our operations more efficient, making our lead time shorter, a whole bunch of things like that. So you've mentioned you've worked in you've helped manufacturing in the past, you've worked in those environments. What are some good examples of things that you've seen that are relevant in the manufacturing industry that can help support this exact thought process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think inventory is a really big one, right? So the larger the inventory gets, the harder it is to manage and stay on top of, right? And store. And so, we see manufacturers of all different sizes that have, we're all trying to get to this just in time. I only want to have on hand and store the amount of inventory necessary to meet customer demand. Because as that inventory starts to grow and I'm not utilizing it, now I'm spending capital and resources to store that inventory, to manage it, to account for all of those things. And so I think when we think about inventory, it's sort of this blend, right? It's not just, okay, I've got a good inventory count, I know how my inventory turns, but it's what does customer demand look like over the next 3, 6, 12 months? Are there historical trends? Do I know in July and August I expect a pretty significant uptick? Are there other things like out in the marketplace that indicate my demand's going to go up? If X happens, I know that my orders are going to increase. Thus, I need to start scaling up the inventory. And then there's also the component of, well, what's the lag time? If you need part X to manufacture a product, how long is it going to take you to get that part in? Because oftentimes if you're dealing with different suppliers, you have different lag time across, the entire matrix. So it's really trying to blend all of that information together to be able to manage the inventory in a way that, reduces the cost of handling it, and then also having enough of it on hand to not, change your production cycle.
Well, that, it's interesting that you mentioned about inventory and stuff. I actually remember working with a client years ago, and one of the things that we noticed is on a monthly basis, their margins were slipping and their material costs were going up. And they had data in a lot of different systems, so it was really difficult to figure out and get a good sense of what was happening. Ultimately, I ended up figuring out that they were having a serious quality issue, and the only reason is because I happened to notice that their trash bills were going up, and the trash is billed on weight, and it was a heavy material that they had. So I actually literally got these invoices and could see the weight, and ended up going to them and showing them that, hey, we were throwing away a lot more stuff. But this was a very manual process of literally going through, first finding it, going through the general ledger and saying, okay, wait a second, I see a trend here that doesn't make sense. Then digging out invoices. So, and I guess my point being is a lot of manufacturers will have a basic accounting system, but then they may have a different inventory system. They might have a different maintenance process system, or they may not even have a system necessarily at all, maybe Excel spreadsheets. When you've got all this stuff kind of all over the place, how do you do that? How do you work with that?
Right. So you're trying to do a root cause analysis, but you've got data sitting in 10 systems, and just the process of accumulating the data takes so long. By the time you've done it, it's already passed. And it might deliver some great insights. So I think when we talk about that, what we have to do is look at a couple of things. So we've got data across disparate systems, which probably means they're not formatted the same way. But I think today what we're finding is more and more like subscription-based tools, or even, tools that have back-end availability to pull data out, right? So we can utilize tools and technologies that are out there today. Internally at James Moore, we use a tool called Alteryx, and then we also are leveraging Power BI for some of that visualization of the data to blend, to gather, right? Automatically gather the data, put it together, and then apply the logic that helps us formulate those decisions. Because I think everybody gets really excited about dashboards. Like, I want a dashboard. Well, you can't get to the dashboard phase until you get the data. And, you don't want to have to undergo this massive data exercise, manually over and over again, if it's going to be relevant to the organization. So we really want to make that a repeatable process.
So, I guess one of the things that comes to mind too, though, is, you've got a lot of these systems where, and it seems to be like, this has changed over the last, say, 10 years or so, where you got all this data in a system, but you got to get like their engineers to do something so you can get the data out. When I think a lot of them use the same types of back-end databases that are relatively accessed. You just need to know what the data tables are. So I guess what you're saying is, there's some level of automation that you can build into these things, and that's part of this business intelligence process.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about it, in talking about, like, I joke, it's like just-in-time data. We need to get the data timely, because if we're going to make decisions, we have to be able to kind of have a snap of the finger and pull together that information. And really the only way to do that is to connect to these systems, sometimes sort of through the back channels, right? Pull that information out, and then, use a tool to build that workflow and apply the logic steps to transform the data into something that's actually usable. What we want to try to avoid is somebody now whose full-time job is running these reports out of, 10 different systems. We really want to kind of go behind, pull out the data, and do it in a different sort of way so that it's not so manually intensive. So process automation as it relates to data analytics is important, because great, you went through the exercise, but if you can't do it quickly and, again and again and again, it's just too time consuming. And I think organizations are always trying to do more with less resources, less everything. And so we want to enable that by using some technologies that help, automate that across the board.
Well, and I think even just as an example, recently you had worked with a organization that was taking them like 8 hours to get some data points where they needed it for whatever purpose it was. and you got it down to like 30 seconds or something like that. So was it, I may be exaggerating,
well,
but it was
30 seconds to run the workflow, right? But then they have an analyst that's looking at the data to look for anomalies, right? So instead of the analyst spending the time putting all of the data together and doing sort of a data manipulation exercise, they're actually able now to review and try to gain some insights out of the data. What looks strange, what's not normal, And so it changes, it's more value add time the person is doing. 8 hours to manually cobble a file together, by hour 8, you're not really interested in what story that data is trying to tell you, right? Like you just want to post the journal entry and be done with it. So when we can automate that process, it really just frees someone up to be able to do more of the analytics on that data. So they're not going through 6,000 lines of data, looking at every transaction and trying to make, determinations. So absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit more specific to manufacturing. We talked about inventory. What are some other examples of areas you've seen that will be relevant? And this whole idea of business intelligence, because what it kind of says to me is like, okay, I can take something and use it to perhaps change or understand what's going on in my business, or think about what's going on, or what might be going down that I have to think about, and allow my business to react to that proactively, as opposed to finding out after the fact. We always kind of joke around in the financial statement world, right? You get a financial statement maybe 10, 15 days. If you've got a good accounting department, that's when you should be. Yep. But it's still historical. We're looking backwards, right? Saying, oh man, I wish I could have. To me, business intelligence gets into thinking about on a more, either day by day, week by week, or maybe even somewhat forward looking. So, maybe you've got something that can help manufacturers who are listening into this understand, okay, what are some other things that might be relevant here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we want to get more into, listen, we're not fortune tellers, but we want to be able to be a little bit more predictive. So we talk about things like predictive analytics. So as an example, I mean, this affects all organizations, but manufacturers especially, supply costs, right? And so do we have enough information internally to sort of pull together and maybe look at market trends and look at what's going on? Because there is so much volatility right now in sort of materials and different sort of supplies, and analyze, what would be, if there is going to be a change in price for this specific supply, which one is going to have the most impact on our organization? Are there things that are trending upwards that are going to impact our bottom line? And so we kind of can do an exercise where we're looking at, what supplies are being purchased across, a range, and see, are you kind of benchmarking against other, organizations that supply those? Are you paying too much? Are you paying too much? Is it trending upwards? Do you, is there an alternative, vendor that you could be utilizing? So I think those are really important, especially with the volatility right now. The other one is predictive maintenance. So we think for manufacturers, there's this concept of, depending on the size of listen, all sizes of organizations, you can't afford for equipment to be going down, right? Rarely. That's not a good for your production cycle. You want to have all of your machinery and equipment functioning and running. And so when we get into predictive maintenance, it's really around, are you being proactive versus reactive? Do you have the data in-house, and you probably do, available to show when you should be doing maintenance, repairing, replacing parts, doing certain maintenance types of activities? And I think that we want to get to a place where you're not being sort of led around. You can make these decisions up front and do those things instead of being surprised, right? We want to take surprise out of our daily operations. Nobody likes a surprise. And I think, on that same conversation, are you capturing today the data that you need to be able to do that? And sometimes the answer is no, but you could, right?
Well, I mean, it makes, and that, I think that's a good segue into, for manufacturers, I think the data, really you've got, I guess it depends at the end of the day. I've seen a lot of some rely on just their intuitive nature. It's a smaller business. They can see what's going on. They can put their hands around it. Some of them are larger and they just don't know how to capture this data in a way that makes sense. And, I look at this on all sides. So, Greg, take an example like supply costs. Hey, it would be great to understand where things are going, because sometimes, like we said, we look back historical and all of a sudden get surprised sometimes by, oh, wait a second, what's going on here? All of a sudden my costs are going out of control, or, we've had these price increases, or, you might be looking at commodity prices and saying, okay, if the commodity prices are going up, what does that mean for my margins? What does that mean from, what am I going to do with my customer base? Do I need to increase prices? All these strategic decisions that you have to think about. Then you look at something simple like my machinery. When am I going to need to replace it? What is the next maintenance period? How is that? So, and you can, I can think of other examples of scrap, labor utilization, capacity, or a lack thereof capacity.
Sure.
What's normal capacity mean? There's so many different things that I think can play into it. But, so I guess as I start thinking about this, and, there's a lot to think about. So, so far, kind of what I pulled from this is if we can get the data in some way, shape, or form, no matter how many systems, chances are we can work with it in a way to get us into something that is meaningful. Which I guess is that next thing is, okay, so how do you start down this road? I guess one thing I think of, and you can kind of take it from there, is got to know what's important to you.
Absolutely. What are the problems you're having today? What are the questions that you're asking that you don't know the answer to? Like, I think a lot of our business owners know it in their gut, right? But they really want the data to back it up. And the questions about, should we purchase new equipment? Should we expand our operations? Should we target a new market? And you get these gut instincts. And I think sometimes, right, we want to bring the data back behind it to either, right, shore up and say, yeah, absolutely. And here's the data that supports that conclusion. Or yes, but, or yes, and you also need to keep these other things in mind. So I think the first process is figure out what the problem is, or figure out what the question is. And then I think it's, do you have enough data or in-house today to actually do the analysis? So we use predictive maintenance as an example. So there's a couple of questions we would start with, right? Like, do you have repair logs? Are you logging when you're repairing your machines? Do you have invoices available for that repair expense, right? Like, so when did those repairs happen? How often are they happening? Do you have, a piece of equipment that continues to go down? And then just, general inventory of different equipment that you have in house. Like, did you summarize it all? So it's not, very helpful. So I think that's the first is, what data do you have? And then it's working through, okay, well, maybe we don't have all of the data we have, but now let's work to collect these other pieces of information so we can sort of have more of a holistic picture. And that's really where that process automation component comes into play, because more than likely, right, the invoices are sitting in one system, the inventory of machinery and equipment sitting in another, the repair logs, maybe somebody's just doing that in Word or PDF or something and sitting in another. So we want to use process automation to bring together that data and normalize it and create relationships between it and apply the logic. And then that way, right, we can move forward. So I think embarking on this journey is the question or the problem, drilling down on, well, what data do I need to actually make a decision on this? Do I have the data in-house today? And then, okay, now how do I need to marry that data together and then make that process repeatable, if that's something I'm going to want to do on a daily, monthly, or quarterly basis, right? Because then we want to make it easy and repeatable, so it's not a major, onus on the organization to try to bring it all together.
Well, I think, one of the things that comes to mind, when you start talking about embarking on this journey, is you're right. What is the question? What is the problem? And part of that might be, and we spent some time on earlier episodes of More Manufacturing talking about transition planning and increasing the value of your business, right? So one of the things that, to me, one of the things that increases the value, and one of the value drivers we often talk about, includes processes as well as data analytics and benchmarking and a number of these other areas. The more we can understand, the more we can adjust. It might impact your margins. It might improve your margins. It might improve your predictability of inventory. And that's one I've seen on many times with clients where they order more raw materials, for example, and they actually need. They might have 2-3 months of a certain raw material on hand. Meanwhile, the vendor can get them that same product in a week or two.
Right.
And so the lead time isn't there, but there's not a connection between. And so when inventory is sitting on your shelf, like you mentioned earlier, it's literally cash. And if you're borrowing on a line of credit to, to fund that. Now you're paying interest and other things. And so these components can be actually critical ways to increase the value of your business over time by focusing on the right metrics, on the right things that are actually going to improve your operation. So, I do think that's something that, is really, really important for any business just to consider, especially if you're looking at, 3 to 5 years and you might want to sell your business. You got to start that stuff now so you can really have it tuned in by the time you actually try to go to market with that business. So it's just something else to think about.
Yeah, I think that where do I spend my next dollar is important. Am I spending that next dollar on inventory? Am I spending it on payroll? Am I spending it on, a new warehouse? So, that capital optimization, if you're running lean processes, right, you can very, more easily determine where you should be, investing those dollars for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, we talked about, you mentioned a couple of tools and, I know that, anybody can buy these tools and work with them, but are they, is it a lot of cost for those? Is this something that businesses can, get into relatively easy without having to spend an arm and a leg on those things?
Well, here's the first thing. I think what I see over and over again is a lot of times you already have tools in-house that you're not fully utilizing. They have capabilities you haven't turned on or haven't, implemented, you implemented 2 of the modules, not 5 of the modules because you just didn't have time to do it. So I think first is you kind of look at your existing technology stack or tool set and you say, are we fully utilizing all of the capabilities and connections that are available between the tools? Because you talked about earlier, right? Sort of this marriage of operational data and financial data to be able to make some decisions. So sometimes, right, there are connections available between these different systems that maybe you're not utilizing today. And then secondarily, I use an example like Power BI is relatively inexpensive. And if you're using Microsoft in-house today, to get a license is not that expensive. So you have somebody with that sort of capability in-house that has that aptitude for data, that's really something you can ramp up pretty quickly within the organization without a whole lot of cost. And then, we start looking at other things, tools like Alteryx and other data, ETL tools that might have a bit of a price tag to it, but then when you look at the cost benefit, right, I have a full-time person just manually manipulating data day in and day out, 365 days a year, and I could really use them over here. Sometimes in that conversation, the cost benefit of onboarding another tool is really worthwhile and provides a tremendous amount of value without a tremendous amount of cost. So I think, start with what you have today, look and see if you're fully utilizing it, see what you can add on at a relatively low price point, and then really look at some of, maybe a little bit slightly more expensive tools and, what's the cost benefit of onboarding those.
So even small manufacturers, an example, probably have some tools on hand that they may not even be aware of that kind of system and I know even I'll go as basic as they come, I guess, Excel, for example, has tools built into it that can allow you to dig data out of certain systems and formulas without going into anything else. But so it sounds like businesses just need these manufacturers need to take a inventory of what they've got and what they have on hand, and then I think spend some time thinking about what's important to them and do they have the data available to be able to do something. And to me, that's where you start from, and then we can kind of work from there as to, okay, well, what do you do with this? How do you automate it? How do you work into putting this into some data set that now I can take a huge data set down to something that makes some sense?
Absolutely, because nobody wants to go through millions of lines of rows of data to try to make interpretations. Our brains just don't work that way. So that's why we have these tools that can pull out insights and show us things we didn't realize were there. And so that's really, I think, where there's a tremendous amount of opportunity.
Well, outstanding. Well, Marie, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely.
I know it's a lot to think about. There's a lot for, I think there's just a lot of opportunities for businesses to really improve themselves. And Marie actually was nice enough to actually create some downloadable materials. Those will be in the comments section. It'll be just some materials that you can look at. It'll give you some thought processes on how to move forward, automate some different things for you to look at as you consider, okay, what's my next steps and how do I use all this data that we have on hand to help my business become more valuable and be a better operating business. With that, I hope everybody has a great rest of your day, and I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Thank you.
To learn more about James Moore & Company's manufacturing services, go to jmco.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our More on Manufacturing series to receive updates when new videos and podcasts are released. If you'd like to be a guest, or if there's a topic you'd like to see covered on a future episode, contact us on our website. You can also follow us on social media for more news as the landscape on manufacturing continues to rapidly evolve.